Special treat tonight. As you know, our brother Wayne Seaton made an extended trip to Ghana in West Africa in the last 6 weeks or so. He's been home for a little over a week. And I didn't want to put too much on him initially because I knew he needed a lot of resting up. But I did want him to get to us with a report about the work that was done as soon as possible. And so tonight worked out real well. So we have a special treat tonight. Wayne is going to talk to us about the work that has just recently been done and is ongoing in the African country of Ghana. We feel real blessed that Wayne has given us an opportunity to be a part of that work that's going on in that African country. As you should know, we currently are supporting 5 men there on a regular basis. The 5 of the Ghanan preachers are being supported by us. And so we have a hand in that work in an ongoing way. I hope you pray about that regularly because lots of good things are happening. Wayne's going to tell us about that. So I'll turn it over to Wayne.
Well, I don't have a hat on this morning or this evening, but I do have the shirt that they gave me. So I'm happy to be able to present to you the report of the work that was done and is continuing to be done. As we're talking, this morning I was texting Felix. He has a study set up with 5 preachers who've been disagreeing with us over the past 6 weeks. And so he's given us the opportunity to give him some advice on how to handle that. But this is our evangelistic team that's here. Leslie Eggerver is right here. He never met him until he came to Ghana with us. And then I'm in the back, and Steve Walker is back here. And then the front is Nathan Peeler. He's Tommy Peeler's son. And then Justin Atkins. And why this report? Well, because it's scriptural. All 3 journeys of the Apostle Paul was begun by the work of the church at Antioch. And so in in Acts chapter 13, verses 1 through 3, now they were at Antioch in the church there, prophets and teachers, Barnabas and Simeon, who's called Niger, and Lucius of Cyrene, and Manaen, who is also brought up with Herod the Tetrarch, and Saul. While they were ministering to the Lord and fasting, the Holy Spirit said, "Set apart for me Barnabas and Saul for the work for which I have called them." Then when they had fasted and prayed, they laid their hands on them, and the brethren sent them away. And then after they came back from their first journey in chapter 14, we see in verses 26 through 28, from there they had sailed to Antioch, from which they had been commended to the grace of God for the work which they had accomplished. When they had arrived and gathered the church together, they began to report all things that God had done with them, and how he had opened the door of faith to the Gentiles, and they spent a long time with the disciples. Well, hopefully I won't spend a long time with you tonight, but it's difficult to condense 6 weeks of work into 30 minutes, but we'll do the best we can. This is the most difficult trip and the most rewarding trip at the same time. Usually that works hand in hand. With great difficulty comes great reward. And so this was the most difficult trip that we've had. We started out with a flight cancellation due to a software patch that was done by a third-party organization, which just virtually grounded all travel and entertainment business, hotels and things like that. So our flight on Thursday was canceled. We tried again on Friday, and that was canceled. The flight was left from here to New York, but the New York flight was canceled. And so we couldn't make our connection. We didn't want to be stranded in New York City. And so I spent 15 hours on the phone with Delta trying to get our tickets rescheduled and never did talk to a human being. So on Saturday, we just decided to go there, to go to the airport and see if we could talk to a human being. And we actually did at the ticket counter, and they made reservations for us for the next Monday. And so we left out that Monday. The problem with the airlines, we found out, was that there was a software patch that was downloaded into every single plane. And what they had to do to fix it is they had to go to every single plane and correct it. And so it was a difficult procedure, very time-consuming procedure. And so we arrived a couple of days late, and we got to the hotel at 3 a.m. on Wednesday morning at Etoile, where we were to begin our work on the 18th, or the 19th rather. Nathan and Leslie had already gotten there, and that was a problem because neither one of them had ever been to Ghana. And so we kind of left them stranded there in Ghana. The Ghanaian brethren took them and they began to work there. Unfortunately, because the program had been thwarted by our not being there, they had to give kind of impromptu lessons. And so the lessons that they had planned to give, they were asked to give different lessons because we were going to start the program a little bit later. But they were met at the airport by Prempeh, Felix Agee, Dan Arthur, and other local preachers that were there. And they split up, one person going to Apam and the other person going to Etoile. They're about a half-hour distance apart. And so as we continued, here we actually began to do the work in... went too far. Etsuberu, Etoile, Apam, Etsuberu, and Akirioko, and other churches in the area. We worked with probably 35 to 40 different churches as we split up, because we split up, there was 5 of us, so we tried to make the most of the opportunities that we had, and so we split up when we could in groups of 4 and 5. One preacher with the translator. And so we could maximize our efficiency, our effectiveness as we went. And so here is Felix's house, his our base of operations as we came there. This is what he was forced out of his house by a Muslim landlord, and so he was given a place to stay if he would fix it up. So the church here offered to give him the funds to fix it up so that he could stay here, and he fixed 2 rooms up. This is what the rooms looked like before they were fixed up. Actually, that is still what the room looks like even now. It's his laundry room. But it was a dirt floor and just bare concrete walls. And so this is what he fixed up. On the left is what he fixed up his 2 rooms of this house. The rest are just dirt floors. And so we split the labor between Apam and Etoile. Those are the major towns in that area. Steve and Leslie stayed in the hotel at Apam, so we never saw each other for that week that we were there. They would start at 10 a.m. Because we got in at 3, so we got up and began our work at 10 a.m. after we could sleep for a little bit. We conducted a men training session during the daytime for about 3 hours. Public preaching at night, focusing on authority and the organizational structure of the church, institutionalism, and marriage. That is the plan that we had for the entire region, for the entire trip, all the regions. We focused on authority, the church organizational structure, the institutionalism, and marriage, because in 1954, Brother Sewell Hall, when he was preaching in Nigeria, got a call from a man in Ghana who wanted to study with him. And he left Nigeria and went to Ghana and baptized the man and started the church there in Ghana in 1954. Wendell Bloom went with him as well. Wendell went institutional. And so the majority of the work that was done after the church was done by institutional brethren. While brethren, more conservative brethren, looked after Nigeria and gave a lot of teaching and effort to Nigeria, nothing was done in a concerted effort for Ghana. And so 9 years ago, I decided to begin a work there after I was convinced to go there by a man that you heard here, Richard Donker. And he convinced me to go, and we've been trying to go every couple of years since that time. And over that time period, a lot of teaching has been done, a lot of preacher training, and a lot of good conservative areas have been established by the work that we have done there. And so public preaching at night focused on authority, institutionalism, and marriage. Stephen Leslie had opposition on the church paying for social events like weddings and funerals and things like that, the social gospel. And so they studied with this man, these two men, Ibrahim Adams and Solomon Aquia, and they opposed Stephen Leslie's teaching, and they studied personally these issues for a little over 2 hours. And when Steve and Leslie came, and this is when we were headed for Solomon Abedi's area. Solomon is one of the men that we are supporting, so we had a lectureship there. And we went there, and these two men followed us there. And Justin and Nathan and I stayed as we worked in Atwam. I didn't want to get ahead of myself. We'll get to Solomon Abedi's area in a little bit. But Nathan and I and Justin stayed in Atwam, and we split our forces up again in that area. And we started at 10, started from Felix's house, and we spent our labors as much as we could in multiple locations to enhance our effectiveness there. And we focused on the same things. Again, that was our plan from the very beginning. We had opposition to the institutional question. But everything was generally, by the brethren, were generally well received. The problems we had were with the local preachers that were there. And so we did street preaching at night and training in the daytime. About 3 hours of training, preacher training in the daytime, men's training in the daytime, and then each night we did street preaching. And this is an example of the abuse of the Lord's money that we've been talking about. And I don't know if you can see that, but in marriage, and this was publicly posted. I got ridiculed for posting this on Facebook, but I posted this with making no comment about it, just posted it just to show the brethren on my Facebook page what they're doing there. In marriage, when one member from the church marries, they should receive 2 weeks free will contribution plus 300 CDs. And so that's what happens when one member of the church, two members of the church marry, and they should receive 2 weeks free will contribution plus 500 CDs from the church treasury. And members are required to inform the church at least 3 months before the marriage date, otherwise the church may only send a delegation to decide on what to do. So they wanted to make sure everybody, if they want their money, that they let them know 3 months in advance. And if you had a birth, all members in good standing, as at the time of giving birth in the church, which is an interesting concept within itself, giving birth in the church, married or single. So you could give birth, whether you're married or single, you should receive 2 weeks free will offering. Both parents in the church receive 250 CDs. One member of the church receives 150 CDs. And husbands to inform the church when the wife delivers a baby. And just to give you a concept of what this money, how much this money is, a preacher's typical salary is 200 CDs a month. And so, if you have a funeral, a member's death, the church shall support the cost of the coffin, the shroud, and the food to 2,000 CDs. The death of a parent or a spouse of a member, the church shall offer 2 weeks free will contribution plus 400 CDs. The death of a child of a member, the fellow shall receive the church leaders, shall inform the church leaders to make the requisite decision on it. Two members who together lost a relative, as mentioned in this policy, shall jointly receive 2 weeks free will contribution plus 500 CDs. So you can see they have plenty of money in the Lord's treasury to provide all of these things, these social things, but they don't have enough money in the treasury to pay the preacher. And so 200 CDs, just so you'll know, is about $15. So 200 CDs a month is what they typically receive for preaching. And then down here, other part to be assessed, vocal training graduation, a vocational training graduation, 300 CDs you get for that. Tertiary education graduation, 300 CDs for that. So the Lord's money is being just misappropriated left and right for all these social events, and that's what we stood against. That's what we taught against. And that's where much of the opposition came in when we taught against these things. And so, like we said, there's plenty of money for social things, but not enough money to pay the preachers. There's plenty of money for there's an institution that's grown up there called Church of Christ Ghana. And Church of Christ Ghana is a superstructure under which all churches are to be, are to submit to. And they have a national headquarters, they have a national treasury to which all churches must that agree with this policy must provide 1 month's contribution to. And then out of that, it's nothing but a missionary society we were talking about earlier. Out of that, the preachers would all receive from that headquarters, that organization, Church of Christ Ghana, they would receive their support from that group. And then there was, the elderships are subverted by a national board of trustees that would oversee all of the local congregations. And so what they've done is simply made a human institution, a denomination out of the Lord's church. And we stood violently opposed to that, and that's where we got a lot of opposition as well. Because their design is to bring every church in Ghana under its umbrella. During that time we were in Apam and Atwam, we had 8 baptisms. And this is how they baptized them. You can see the sea on the left-hand side. It's a very violent, the sea is very violent. Our son Tim tried to swim in that sea and almost lost his life in 2017 because the undertow is so great. But you can see there's a pool right about here. And that pool of water is where this baptism is taking place over here. And that's where they typically baptize them. And those are some of the members that were baptized. And this is Justin as he's holding Yao Wayne. Yao Wayne is Felix's son. He's actually called Justin Wayne Ajee. And Justin because Justin helped support him, and Wayne because I was giving him a lot of grief about some of the things that he was teaching. But he appreciated all the help that we tried to give him, and so he named his one and only son, he says, Justin Wayne. And so he's called Justin Wayne when he goes to school, but he's called Yao Wayne at home. So I was honored to have that. We also bought a generator for Felix to be able to use as he's doing the street preaching. Street preaching is something that is new to our way of thinking, but it's very old to them. What they do is they would go evangelize a community, and during the daytime they would do house-to-house evangelism, and then at night, in the daytime they would do the evangelism and say, we're preaching tonight, and every night this week come and hear us. And so they would gather an audience to hear the gospel. It would also be presented over the local radio station at the same time. So they have huge horns, and those horns blare out into the community. They don't have noise ordinances like we do in our country that prevent things like this from happening. But they broadcast this so you can't help but hear the gospel message throughout the whole town. And that's the design of these horns. And so we bought a generator. One time when we were there, the power schedule was 12 hours on, 12 hours off. You had 12 hours of power in the daytime or at night, wherever your schedule happened to be. They didn't have that schedule this time. It just went out. You didn't know when it went out. It would just go out. So if you're in the middle of a lesson, you would have no lights. And so this would be very crucial to them to be able to utilize so that they could do street preaching throughout the year or years. We started this in 2017, bought the first generator in 2017 for Robert Jackson in Takoradi. And he still has it, still looks brand new, he still uses it. So from Apam and Atwam, we went to Akirio Church, where Solomon Abedi is, and this is the church there, the church building. And this gentleman here is a man who came down from the Volta region. And we were able to teach him and to bring him along into a closer understanding of the Word of God. And he is now very much with our understanding of the Scriptures and is opposed to all the social programs and the schools of preaching and things like that. So we had some of the challenges that we had is we had some strong opposition to the teaching. Steve and Leslie rather studied with these two guys that I told you about for a couple of hours, and they followed us to Akiriko. And while I was preaching, they came into the assembly. And that's the first time actually that I had seen saw Leslie. And so I was preaching on the social gospel as they were studying the social gospel with these two men. And so they came in while I was preaching on the social gospel. We didn't plan it that way. It's just the way it worked out. And Nathan taught on the church organizational structure. So after the lesson, we had a question and answer series. And Solomon Aquia took the microphone and took over the assembly. He didn't ask a question. The microphone was supposed to be for those people who were asking questions. He didn't ask a question. He just started to make statements. And so I had already sat down. So after a few minutes of him not giving a question, I stood up and confronted him and said, why are you making a statement? This period is for question and answer time. It's not for statement making. And so he sat down. And we studied this issue after services, or talked about it after services. He was a very belligerent man who would talk over you and not allow you to talk. And he would try to monopolize the conversation. And so I said, well, we're not getting anywhere this way. Why don't we study the Scriptures, and you can show me from the Scriptures where these things are authorized. And so I went to get my Bible. And when I came back with my open Bible, he said, I'm too tired. He was not too tired to sit there and discuss with me when we didn't have a Bible. But as soon as I came out with a Bible, then he kind of withered in the background. And so these are some of the studies with some of these people that Felix is working with. Felix is organizing. And so when he got up, he said, I agree with everything these brethren are saying. They're absolutely right. And then after it was over, and I said, well, then why are you saying it? You don't need to be saying it if you agree with me. Did you think I was unable to present it in such a way that people could understand it? They would need you to interpret for me. No. So anyway, when we got to talking about it ourselves, he said, you're a false teacher. You're teaching error. And so it kind of went downhill from there. And we started to look at the Scriptures, and he said, no, I can't do that. I'm too tired. So when confronted, he backed down. So that's some of the vocal opposition that we had at Akiriko Church. With the one exception, the teaching was well received by all. I thought it was very well received. That's us after the services are over. This is during services on the right-hand side, and then you see Nathan here walking around with the members. And here is that tent, or a covering that the brethren here chipped in to purchase. And so that's the covering, so that this church building is not able to handle all the people. The building is just overflowing. And so you brethren chipped in and provided this covering for those, and it went to they were moving it here, but it goes to the back of the building right here. covering the doorway, so they could look into the doorway and be covered from the elements when it rains and when the sun is beating down. And I was able to find somebody. Daryl Woodard is in Memphis, and he gave a laptop to Solomon. Solomon had requested a laptop sometime before because his broke. He couldn't involve himself with any of the studies that we have Zoom studies twice a week, and he couldn't be involved in that because he didn't have a laptop anymore. And our driver, this is John Arthur, our driver, we gave him, or actually Justin gave him a phone so that he could have directions. We got lost time and time again as he was driving us. So Justin said, I'm going to get you a phone. It's going to have Google Maps and you can find your way anywhere. And so Justin bought him that phone, and I presented Solomon Abedi, and that's Solomon and his wife here on the right-hand side with the laptop. And then from Solomon's place, we went to Cape Coast, and Switchy, and that's pronounced as Switchy, although it doesn't look like it. That's the way it's pronounced. And Elmina congregations. Elmina and Iswitchy are two very conservative bases of operation that we have there in the Cape Coast area. And they're about a 45-minute drive apart. Justin and I were at Iswitchy on Sunday and in the evening, Sunday morning and in the evenings we taught. And then Steve was at the church in Tranoa Sunday and the evenings. Nathan was at Wiamoa Church. As I said, we tried to split up everywhere we could to maximize the time that we had. And Leslie went to Nkanfoa Church on Sunday and in the evenings. We did house to house, a personal evangelism in the daytime, radio preaching there, lectureships at night, or lectureships in the daytime, and then preaching at night. And we had a time period where we had question and answers with 24 preachers on the end of the program on Saturday. And we found out that Dan told us this, and we found out during this question and answer series that he had invited all of the preachers that disagreed with him to come, and they all came. And so we had a couple dozen preachers, all who were not friendly to not a friendly audience as we were preaching the things that they were involved in, and we were naming the things that they were involved in. They didn't like that. But it turned out very well. The Saturday lectureships, and there's you can see Steve, I think. Nathan is over here, and Steve is over here as they were preaching. More than 100 people were at these lectureships as we were preaching, except at Kumasi, except at Asofwa. There was about 300 there at Asofwa. But there was typically 100 to 150, somewhere around there in these congregations, various congregations that were there. We had lively discussions. After every lecture, we had a question and answer period in which they were permitted to ask any question and get a Bible answer for whatever. And so, as I said, Dan invited the preachers who were in opposition to our teaching to come so they could hear with their own ears. Before they came, they initially said that we were false teachers. By the time that we had finished, they said, well, you are preacher, you are preaching sound words of truth. And then 2 more were baptized at this location. Here's just an example of one baptism and the perils that you have to go through, walking across this log to find a place to deep enough to be able to baptize someone. While here, we had a unique opportunity. Dan Arthur who's the preacher there at Switchy, had been trying to make an inroad into this school for quite a while so that he could hold services there, he could have Bible teaching done with this high school. It's a technical high school. And so he was unsuccessful in being able to get permission, so we met with the school to see what we could do, if we could help grease the wheels to make this happen. And so the school made a request of us. They wanted a couple of projectors, and they wanted a printer. And so the cheapest of those was a printer. And so with the personal funds that you provided very, very graciously to us, we used some of that money to purchase an office laser printer for the school. And the design of our doing that was so that this would enable, act as an incentive to get Dan into there to be able to preach and have Sunday services. He likes to have Sunday services at nursing schools or high schools before going to regular services. And so that was the design there. And so we provided this new laser printer to the school, and all of a sudden the doors were open, and Dan was allowed that very day to come in and be able to teach the students. And so while this is kind of a foreign concept to us of trying to try to use equipment as an incentive to go in and preach the gospel, it's very much how it operates in the rest of the world. I don't know if that's the way it was in Russia, but that's the way it is in Africa. And so all three of us were able to speak to the entire student body. It's about 300 high school kids, and encourage them to not lose sight of their Creator in the days of their youth. And so I have some pictures. This is the school as they were gathered together to listen. It's the Ifutu Technical High School. And here is Justin doing the speaking, and then here is Steve, who is also doing the speaking. All three of us spoke during that time. Leslie was not there. But you can see Steve's, everyone can pass God's test. And so he gave God's test. And so here's more pictures of the school and what we were doing while we were there. And then we came for the next 10 days to Takrady, where we were teaching in Takrady, and we started a new church in Chavin. I say Takrady, this was really out in the lower 40. This was out in the middle of nowhere. And the reason that Robert, and this is Robert Jackson right here, the reason that Robert chose that is because Chavin was circled by 5 other villages. And so it was a Sabbatarian community that was there. And so he wanted to establish the Lord's church in this where there was no church. That's his work, is to establish churches. He is a church planter. He has planted 5 churches. And what he does is he trains his own people. He doesn't send them to a Bible college, because we've been teaching him that the church does not have any authority to use that. So he trains his own people. And then every time he establishes a church, he trains that person who is going to take over that work. And so that church, from the very inception, has a full-time preacher working with it. And this church had 1 member that was baptized. We baptized 1 person here. And from that 1 member, they were able to have church services. Some other brethren came to support them in that one first service, but Steve Walker preached the first lesson. Here are some natural resources. I don't know if you can see this very well, but this right here, see that black thing on this tree? This is a rubber tree orchard. And so that black can, what they would do is they would scar the outside of the tree so that the sap would run and it would be funneled into this can. And then the can would dry in the sun, and that would dry out and become these rubber balls. And so the rubber tree, and I for some reason was shocked that they were white, but the sap coming out of the tree is milky color, and so when all the water evaporates, what's left behind is the natural rubber. And you could grab it, and it felt just like rubber. I mean, it was natural rubber. And so that's the trees. All these trees in this area is a forest of rubber plants. And in the younger plants, when the sap flows, they use those trees for the rubber, and then it stops producing sap. And so when it does, it's big and it's used for lumber then. It's a very, very hard, dense wood. And here's a coconut that we enjoyed. And that's the milk from the coconut. Coconut milk is not white, it's clear. It is water, but it doesn't taste like water. But that's just some of the natural resources of the area where we were involved. And here we have kind of interesting sights. This over here caught my eye. This caught my eye here. Notice how graphic that sign is. It's a man laying down, spread eagle, with a lightning bolt going straight through his heart, and then saying, danger of death. You don't see, we're kind of more cultured than that, I guess you would say. We don't have those graphic kind of signs like they do. Those were posted all over the place. And so it got my attention. And so that's electrical field in there, trying to keep you out. And this is the natural beauty of the ocean, which is where we were. And as we would study, you can see my Bible right here. I was getting up to take the picture, but we studied under the shade of this tree, whatever kind of tree it was. So that's how we had our studies typically when we would do house to house. And we taught against the Sabbatarian doctrine. The plan that we had, that we followed, was we taught on the scheme of redemption, the one true church, tithing of the law or free will offering in Christ, Sunday services versus Sabbath day keeping. The law was temporary and never intended to be for Gentiles, never intended to be for us. And then the difference between the Old and the New Testament. So we hit as much of the Sabbatarian teaching as we could, and they didn't appreciate that. So this is what we would do at the street preaching, the subjects that we would hit in the street preaching, and this is the number of people that we had in that area. And the Sabbatarians, we found out, were told for you to not listen, want you to go to your house and turn your TV up as loud as you can so that the loudspeakers can't be heard by you. And so they tried that, but some came out and listened anyway. And one woman was baptized and the new church was planted there. And it meets now in an abandoned school. Because we taught against their doctrine, we had problems with the Sabbatarians. The Sabbatarians were influential in the local government, so the government could inflict persecution upon the church that was trying to be started there. And so they refused to allow men who were working in that area to purchase anything. You couldn't even buy a piece of paper. They would not allow them to stay in a rented room overnight. So they slept on the street, the men that were evangelizing that community. And the Sabbatarians tried to run us off the road 2 different times in the same day. And then on the same day, they blocked our way for about an hour so that we couldn't get into Sabine. Fortunately, the people behind us and the people behind them saw what was happening, and everybody got out, and there was a riot that ensued. And this woman right here came to our rescue, and she was all over them, I mean verbally. All over them, and they eventually were shamed into moving their vehicle. And you can see them as they're coming on this side over here. That's them approaching us. And then we're just at loggerhead face to face with each other where we stayed for an hour. And these are examples of some of the road conditions that we had to travel. And it got worse. That's us getting stuck in the mud and trying to push the van out of the mud. It was not successful no matter how we pushed or which direction we pushed. We couldn't get it out, so we just walked on in and had the evening services, and eventually they got it unstuck. But again, everywhere we would go, we would split up, and we went to Asa Mesa, Busura, Busra, rather, Sancor, and other churches that Robert had established. And this is us going to one of those churches at night. And this is the only light they had. There was no electricity. The only light they had was a little battery-operated lamp. And so there was no way we could do any kind of a presentation. So most of the speeches, most of the lections, most of the lessons were what we had planned just from looking at the Scriptures and holding our cell phone over the Scriptures so we could have the light to see it. And here's Robert and us as we were working together in one of the... And they built all of these buildings. The members did. They have never asked for money to build a church building. They have built it all themselves. And what they do is they hire somebody to make these blocks. They buy a bag of cement and bring sand in, and they have a press. And they press it together with a certain amount of water, and they make these concrete blocks and dry them in the sun. And then they come in and lay the blocks. And it's interesting to watch them do that. But we'd have the final day of our program. This is an example of the church building that they had built. And this is one building here, and this is the one where we were worshiping at, these two. And you can see the size of the crowds that were there as we were finishing up our time at Takoradi. And at the end of every service, we gave out pen drives. I tried to get the best deal I could on pen drives, so I got a 64 gig pen drive for about $1.50 a piece, and I bought 100 of those, and then another 100 for $2 a piece. I was waiting for a better price. Well, I'm not going to do that again because it wound up being just a waste of the Lord's money. We bought drives that half of them didn't work. I figure it was all electronic, so it shouldn't make a difference, but it did. So I'm never going to buy cheap rate drives again because most of them didn't work, and all of our labors on building these drives in populating these drives with all this teaching material was virtually for nothing. We were able to leave a few drives in each location, and then they could copy them and give them to people that they wanted to have them, mostly the preachers that were there. And we also put it on WhatsApp, so any of the preachers could access those drives on WhatsApp. And each one of us gave all of our lessons. I brought about 100 lessons, and Steve brought about 60, and I don't know how many Leslie brought, but he brought a ton. And all of those were given to the brethren after we left, along with just generations worth of teaching material that was freeware that we could get. That's why we needed a 64 gig drive, because it was about 35 to 40 gig of information that we gave out. This is one of the houses that the preachers that we support are. This is Alex's house. And this is the front of his house right here. You can see his front door. We were allowed to go in and see. There's the mosquito netting that keeps them from getting malaria from the mosquitoes. And malaria is really a big problem there. Every trip we've gone, a part of our members got malaria in every trip. This is their kitchen. This is they have a store, operate a store out of it, and this is their storehouse that they use to put some of their material in. And this is John right here and his family. So this is Nab right here. Nab, and then this is Alex. Along the way, we had car troubles. We had a flat tire that, as we were going to Kumasi, that kept us from arriving on time to do a lectureship there. We also had an issue with the door. We couldn't open and shut the door, so we couldn't have anybody go in except through the front. So that's Justin here working on his own van. He donated this van back in 2017. and it's been there ever since. And he used it for 10 years, and then they used it for another 10 years in Ghana. So it's about done with its usefulness. That's him taking the car apart, trying to fix that door, which eventually was fixed. It cost about $50 in parts, and he was able to get it fixed. Again, like we did everywhere else, we maximized our work by splitting apart. In Quantakesi is where we started there. Then we went to Asofua and Abrepo and I can't remember how that name is. Akesi, Esaso, Tredi, and Barakis. And we each preached on authority, institutionalism, marriage, divorce, and remarriage, and the church. And we taught against the Church of Christ Ghana. And that's a lot of opposition that we received was from the social gospel and from Church of Christ Ghana. And what that is, a centralization attempt to put all churches under this national headquarters that I talked about, national treasury and a national creed. Kumasi, that was where I first started back in 2015, has stood against this. And they are the strongest of the churches because they have the longest track record of being taught these issues. And so they are the strongest against these. So most of the people that were in the Kumasi area would not come and listen to us. They all viewed us as false teachers because we stood in opposition to Church of Christ Ghana, to which they all subscribed. And they also would have nothing to do with Asofua, because they stood in opposition to the Church of Christ Ghana, very vocal opposition. And so we were all ostracized by the majority of the churches there in the second largest city in Ghana, which is Kumasi. And they make a very brave stand against institutionalism, against the rise of institutionalism, against the colleges, the preaching schools, and against the Church of Christ Ghana. And this is Leslie, as he is preaching. He would come down to the audience and was trying to teach them about Matthew 18 and talk about the difference between individual responsibility and church responsibility. So he played having a problem with another brother, and then he came up and then he brought two other brethren and says, now does this constitute the church? Because they were saying that one or two, wherever one or two are gathered together, there I am in their midst. That's the church. Well, we got them to understand that was not the church. They viewed those people as representatives of the church. And so it was the church. And no, they're not representatives of the church. That's the responsibility of the person who is trying to resolve the issue. He gets one or two others. This is not the church doing anything, because if they won't listen to the one or two others, then it goes to the church. And so there's a difference between one-on-one, trying to resolve issues one-on-one, and then three-on-one, and then taking it to the church. And they could see that. The only ones that could not see that were the preachers who had an axe to grind, because that's where they camped out their teaching. That's Steve, and then that's the church there as is gathered together. And here is a local funeral of a king of a village, a very powerful guy. We got to meet the king. We didn't bow before the king, but we got to meet him and shake his hand. And they have a week-long celebration. And it's interesting, funerals there are celebrations. They have a celebration before they have anything else. When the relative dies, they celebrate for a week. And then they have a funeral service where they bring in the body, and the body is on display for a couple of months after it comes in from the embalmer, from the what we would call a funeral home. I don't remember what they called it, but they would embalm the body and bring it out, and it would be on display for a couple of months. And depending on the prestige of the family would depend on how long the body would be out. The more prestigious, the longer it stayed out. Sometimes it stayed out for 4 months. I can't imagine that, and here you see them playing drums and all kinds of things in this week-long celebration. And then there is the three of us at Asofua, and you can see the building is pretty well packed. This is the Western restaurant where I got food poisoning while in Kumasi. And that right here is a catfish. And I ate that catfish. I didn't get sick off that catfish. Everybody thought it was the catfish that got me sick, but what got me sick was shrimp that I ate a couple of days later. And this is a local dish that the people eat, and you can see it's got crab and all kinds of things in it. And that's Steve and Tachi and Dan right here. And there's the king right here, the king of the Ashanti region, who is more powerful than the president over there, although he has no political power. And as we were going to our final stop in Sun City, we had more car problems. This time the drive belt broke, which took the fan belt with it, which took a reservoir for the power steering fluid, which also took out a cylinder in the engine. So we had it towed after being on the side of the road for a good length of time. This gentleman right here just about got killed as he was going around the car. There's a 2-lane road and the truck was passing a car. And he honked his horn, and just the last minute, within inches, he almost got hit. But that's us stranded on the side of the road, and we stayed in a little place about an hour outside of Kumasi. And Dan Arthur is a preacher at Cape Coast. He didn't know these people. He didn't know anybody here. He's not from his area. But he went out and found a place in this town for us to preach. We broke down on Saturday night, and by Sunday morning, he was out and had a place for us to preach. He got up at 4 o'clock in the morning, found the Lord's church, and arranged for us to be there. We didn't know them. They didn't know us. We just kind of showed up. And Steve preached on the widow's pot of oil, and I preached on the difference between the individual and the church. That caused a riot where we were. Not by the brethren. The brethren understood exactly and agreed with what we were teaching. But the riot was caused by what's called their church leader and the congregation. Didn't have anything to do with us, outside of the fact that they were disagreeing with what we were saying. But they had a fight not with us, but with their own congregation. And so that was where the near riot came out. There was a lot of disputation going on at that time. And there was much lively discussion I put between the leading man of the congregation and us, really the church that was there. The men paid for our dinner did not come out of the church treasury. The men paid for our dinner as we rented a van to take it to Accra. After all the expenses that we incurred on taking care of the van, it was still cheaper to do that than it was to rent a vehicle for that six-week period of time. So we didn't lose out any money on fixing up the vehicle, even if it's not going to be used again. And so, and Kumasi let us know that they were going to try to get into their vehicle. That they understood that vehicle was just costing too much money to maintain. But the brethren there were very supportive, and they wanted us to add them to the next trip. Everybody wants us to the next trip, but we may try to add them next time we go. This is the van we rented to take us to our last location, which was the capital city of Accra. And this is a 2-lane road, though it doesn't look like a 2-lane road because you see 3 lanes of traffic and they're all going the same way. Well, there, if you're in the way, they honk the horn and you better get out of the way. And they're just going straight through. And people coming from the other side have to drive on the edge of the road to continue on. Unique driving there. We finally got there. We got to our last location at Sun City, and Stone Quarry and Sun City were about a half hour apart, and so we split up our labors. The 3 of us that were left there, Justin had already gone back home. Nathan had already gone back home, so there's the three of us, Steve, me, and Leslie. And so we split up duties for the 3 days left that we were there. We lost time that we were supposed to be there because of the vehicle problems, but we had 3 days there and we made the most of that opportunity that we had. So we split up. There were 6 lessons to be preached, and we each preached 2 lessons. And this was Ben's house, and he took care of us. They fed us. I ate more chicken gizzards and octopus, and I can't remember what all else that I never want to eat again. But that's what we had. Not just at Ben's house, but everywhere we were. And this is us preaching at Sun City here. And then this is the church building where part of it is the church building, another part is where the preacher lives, his residence. And Leslie on the last night had the same issue with the church that was there that I had. He was again preaching on the difference between the individual and the church. And the church could see his teaching, but the local preacher could not. And the local preacher was just disagreeing with him. He was not asking questions. He was giving speeches. And they said, well, we have an old man in our audience here who is a more experienced preacher. Why don't we ask him? So I turned around to see who they were talking about. And then as I turned back around, I didn't see anybody. I turned back around and Leslie was standing in front of me with the mic, handing it to me. And so I was the old man. And so all I did was present the same passages that Leslie had already presented, Matthew 18, 1 Timothy 5:16, and I forgot other passages that we looked at. 1 Corinthians 12:14. The church is not one member, but church is not not one member, but many. And so I gave the same passages and went through Galatians 6 from the very first all the way down to verse 10. And they could clearly understand that the us and the we there is individually as members of the Lord's body universally. All members everywhere, because it included Paul in the us and we. And Paul was not a member of the church of Galatia, so it's not advocating church work, but he's talking about distributive action among individuals. And so the audience saw that, but the preacher had a difficult time with it, and he argued and argued and argued. And he was arguing with his own congregation because they were saying exactly what we were saying because they could see it very clearly in Scripture. So I teased him that he caused a riot the last night of our preaching there, and he said, well, he's just following my example. So during the day, I taught a new converts class, and this is one of the women that I taught. And she wanted to know what to do after becoming a Christian. So we looked at Acts 2 and see same passages that we looked in the lesson this morning. You dedicate your life to the apostles' teaching, the breaking of bread and fellowship and prayer. And that breaking of bread is not a common meal. Everything else there is spiritual, and so the breaking of bread there is the Lord's Supper, as all the other spiritual actions are. And so she understood that, but she said, how can I do that if I can't read? She was illiterate. She could not read. And so I looked for ways in which I could help her get the Word of God orally to her so she could hear it in her own native Fanti language. And I was able to find a phone where you could download an app that could read the Scriptures in Fanti. And so with the funds that you guys all, again, paid, provided to me before I left, we used that money, part of that money, to buy this phone so that this widow lady who could not read, and they were trying to teach her to learn how to read, but it was a long process. So I bought the phone so that she could have a way in which she could try and do what she was supposed to be doing, learning what to do after becoming a Christian. So this is the hotel we stayed at, and I just thought I'd throw this in here. We asked for hot water, and you see the hot water right there. That's just for looks. There is no hot water heater. And so I said, well, there's no hot water heater. They said, okay, we'll get one. And so they brought in a hot water heater. It was a coffee pot. And a bucket. So that's how we had I call it a coffee pot bath. So I would heat the coffee pot, put water in. I always used the red it just made me feel like hot water was going to come out. But I used the red faucet anyway. Nothing came out except cold water. And then I poured the hot water in there. Actually, it worked out pretty good. The coffee pot is a coffee pot shower, a coffee pot bath. So we had a little bitty bucket there that we used to dip the water out and wash off with. And we ended at the airport, and there's Leslie, Steve, and I after 6 weeks and trying to get everything in and out of the trunk. And this is what we tried to establish are these conservative bases of operation. Here's Kumasi up here where we started in 2015. And you see all these areas, Accra we got right here with this last trip. And then these areas are all now strong, very strong conservative bases of operation with the preachers as very conservative. They understand that we've been working with them for quite a long time to bring them along and get them to understand the simplicity of the Scriptures. And they see it, and they understand it, and they preach it, and they teach it. And so, for from you sounded forth the word of the Lord. So we wanted, and we let them know that we expected the word of the Lord to sound out from these areas. And they're doing that. And this morning I've been talking to Felix, who, as I said earlier, he's got 4 or 5 preachers who want to study with him, who's been disagreeing with what we've been teaching, especially about the social gospel and the Church of Christ Ghana. And so we said, hey, we're here to help you in any way, or if you don't need us, that's fine too. Just take advantage of the opportunities you have and teach these brethren. And so they're doing that. What was supplied to the brethren? A generator for a Palm and a Twam, a computer for Solomon and Beatty, a phone to help a literate widow understand the Bible and Fanti, car parts for the vehicle as it was shedding parts as we were driving it, 200 jump drives, the majority of which did not work. So there was just challenge after challenge after challenge on this trip. 4 leather study Bibles that we got for preachers. Food for the men coming from afar to hear these programs. Each one of these locations, they invite people from afar and preachers and leaders from afar. And they come to this location, and they'll come from these other areas, and they can't make a trip back and forth every day, so they just stay there. And so we use the personal funds again that you all generously supplied for that use to help pay for the food of the brethren who are coming from far distances. We support 5 preachers in Ghana. 204 leather Bibles, food for the men, and paying for Leslie's trip and his expenses from Nigeria and all of his expenses while he was with us. Leslie makes $15 a month in Nigeria. That's his pay. They pay for his housing. And then on top of that, they add $15 a month, and that's what he's paid. And so that's why if he was going to be able to come with us. And I always try to bring African brethren with us when we go, because I think it just gives us credibility to have African brethren traveling with us. And so some of the physical challenges that we had in this trip were airline software changes, tire problems, AC compressor, a radiator died, a fan belt, a drive belt, a cylinder died, false brethren opposing us, Sabbatarian opposition of preachers, food poisoning, Church of Christ Ghana, open division over issues, and threats of bloodshed if we were to preach in their areas. That was just intimidation. Nobody really tried to carry through that threat. But then you see the spiritual triumphs of 2024, and they far outweigh the physical challenges that we experienced there. 10 souls were baptized, and I say 10, it was actually 15 because several baptized the day we left. We had an unexpected opportunity to preach the gospel in a town because the car broke down. So we had that blessing. The support of brethren against their own preachers, we had that in just about everywhere we went. Institutional brethren saying we were teaching truth after they were saying we had been teaching error. Once they heard us, they'd never heard us before, but once they heard us, they said, well, you are teaching the truth. And they admitted to that. There's a strong stand in the brethren that we support. You brethren can really take heart in the fact that these preachers that we're supporting are standing for the truth. They're not fair weather Christians. They're facing strong opposition to in their stand for the truth. They are standing for the truth. And so we set up these biblical centers where strong stands for the truth are made against those teaching in error, and strong opposition to them as being faced by them. Brethren we support are holding studies with those who are opposing our preaching. So that's that was what we hoped would take place. That our coming there, preaching against these issues, would spur these discussions by these preachers that we're supporting, and this is happening. And so biblical New Testament Christianity springs from these strong centers of support. And I believe that the entire nation can see a resurgence, much like what we saw in the 1800s in our own country. Former weak brethren on these issues are now strong supporters of the truth. And we can see the growth of 9 years of teaching in Ghana as we look at the church at Kumasi. Greater opportunities for change in Ghana as they present the word of the Lord from these strong centers. And we gained access to a formerly closed opportunity to teach Bible at the Afutu Technical High School. So now Dan is able to go into the high school where he's holding lessons, teaching the children at the high school. And we started a new congregation in a Sabbatarian stronghold, and the Lord's church is now there, and we helped Dan's wife. I didn't mention this. We helped Dan's wife with her inventory from the personal funds that she's provided again, so that she and he could become self-supporting without any need of foreign support. Recommendations for enhancing the cause of Christ in Ghana. And I always give recommendations for the church and for the elders wherever I go. One-time purchase of 4 motor scooters for remote evangelism. That's a $4,000 one-time cost. That's a recommendation and a request that they made. Remote areas are difficult to traverse by car, if impossible. If not impossible. And so these motor scooters are able to go where places where cars cannot go. And so these brethren that I'm asking for this are in these remote backwoods areas of Takoradi. Provide support, if we can, for Leslie Egeriver in Nigeria at $250 a month, if we can do that. His assistance was invaluable on the trip. He is a man of 27 years, but he is an old scholar. He is a very good, well-educated, and I'm talking about well-educated not only in the realms of college. He's going for his PhD in communications, but he's also especially well-educated and versed in the Scriptures. Been taught by a very conservative set of parents. His assistance was invaluable. He gets $15 a month, plus his housing is paid for. And so I would like to shift the Bible support that we give to Felix to different regions of where we're supporting preachers. It's not going to cost us anything to do that. It's just going to be a shift in the money that we're already spending. I would like to put it into Takoradi, where this new church is being formed, and provide them with money to provide Bibles to the people that are being won to Christ. Recommend that Ernest Tachi be supported at $150 a month. Ernest Tachi has lost every bit of support he has. He was the MC at the West Coast School of Preaching, until he found out that through through Chris and Steve, that this was error, that he was believing error, and he completely changed. And he lost all of his support. He was being supported by institutional brethren, and so he lost all of that support. So if we could pick that up, that would be... and what he does, his design, I'll just let you know this, his design is once a month to set up a meeting with all the churches in the area to try and convince them of the New Testament Christianity. The human institutions are sinful. The church has no business supporting them, building them, or utilizing them. The preacher training schools are, again, unscriptural. And so he wants to do that on a rotational basis around his area, which I think is a marvelous idea. And then providing with Solomon Abedi one-time $150. While we were there, I gave him $200 to get a projector so that he could use it for street preaching. Well, the cost was not $200, it was $350. And I verified that with Felix and Ben and Accra. And so if we could provide, I've already given him $200. If we could provide $150. If not, then I'll just, I already told him that I'll just take $100 a month off of his support until that $200 that we've already paid has been taken care of. So that's my recommendation for the work as it progresses onward. And I think that the work, the nation there is on the verge of a New Testament revival in that area. I mean, just simple New Testament Christianity is catching on, and people are making changes and teaching these changes to those around about them. And as that continues, and we have, while we're here in the States, we have 2 days a week where we have Zoom studies with these brethren. And they can ask any questions that they want to ask, and we have pre-designed studies that we give with them. They ask to have a study on a particular topic, and we generate it and present it to them and study it. And so a lot of teaching is done through this avenue of Zoom. So I appreciate your attention. I know I've kept you a long time, and I apologize for that. So it was a little longer than 30 minutes. It was, 35? But I appreciate you for listening to me and for supporting the work that you've done in this area very well. We don't want to leave without providing an opportunity for anyone who needs to consider their lost condition. Think of yourself right now and ask the question, where would I be if Jesus were to come right now? What's my spiritual condition? Would you be saved or would you be lost? And I always tell people, when I ask them this question, the way you are right now is the way you're going to face God in judgment unless you change. And the time to change is now. So if there's any way in which we can help you understand that the Scriptures contain the power of God to transform the life of every individual, we accept that Jesus is our Lord and Savior. We believe that God exists. Without faith, it's impossible to come to God. For those who believe in Him, or those who come to Him, must believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of them that diligently seek Him. And faith comes by hearing by the word of Christ. So you hear the gospel, you believe it, it causes you to see your undone condition before God. It causes you to repent, change your life, make a turn in your life. That causes you to want to confess Christ and then be buried with Him in baptism as you contact the cleansing power that's found in the blood. Or if you have become a Christian at some time in the past and have lost your enthusiasm, lost your zeal, lost your faith, and would like to make public repentance for that, now is the time as we stand and sing. Won't you come, please?